Hello and welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting of Thursday, November 19th, 2015. The time is 5 p.m. May we have roll call, please?
Of course. Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Madam Chair Vartanian?
Here.
Thank you, all present.
Thank you. Number 2 on the agenda is report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, November 16th, 2015 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item number 3 is approval of the minutes of October 15th, 2015. Do we have any changes or
I'll abstain.
corrections? You were not here, so I'll just need a motion and a second for approval, please.
I move to approve the minutes.
I second.
Commissioner
Roll call,
Shire?
please.
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Madam Chair Vartanian?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Number 4 is oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. And I have one card for oral communications. Rej Mardian.
Good evening, Chairwoman Vartanian and Commissioners. My name is Vaj Mardian. I'm a 40-year resident of Glendale, past Chair and Commissioner of HPC, current TGHS Director, and currently the Chair of DRB. It has been a while since I have appeared in front of you, and it's always a pleasure to see such passionate, dedicated individuals, and I appreciate you doing and trying to preserve our city's architectural gems. I appear in front of you today not just in appreciation, but also with some concerns about how the historic district design guidelines are applied, including alterations to historic districts, contributors, and designated buildings. As you recall, I was part of the commission when we approved the historic design guidelines. Such guidelines were due to community effort to preserve our historic resources, and some of which you were part of. When I left the dais, and I said, I'll be back to raise some concerns if the design guidelines are not applied properly and originally intended. Here I am today. I'm here to tell you that the guidelines mean what they say. The intent is that the homeowners be held to the highest standard. Character-defining features should not be altered in violation of the guidelines without compelling reasons to justify it, and without the case going before HPC. For example, window replacement, when necessary, should be replaced in kind, matching material of the original window, and is the best approach. But if it's not possible, it should certainly match the historic window as closely as possible in its type, style, proportion, material profile, arrangements, and a number of divided lights. The same principle should apply to the guidelines to decisions about exterior finishes, doors, and other key defining features. Homeowners are not held to that standard. Those who do illegal work should not be given the special license to violate guidelines. Unpermitted window replacement at 1333 East Mountain speaks directly to these points, and at the Stone House at 362 Angelus that was surveyed and found eligible for the National Registry recently had the windows illegally replaced with vinyl. If we do not apply the guidelines as written, the problem will never end. Other few matters, phase or piecemeal design alteration and approved construction should never be allowed on significant or designated buildings, regardless of circumstances and who the applicant is, except when the public safety is an issue. As much as I like to see buildings come alive and be reused, and I salute the property owners for taking such tremendous tasks, a piecemeal process can never be allowed. As a professional, I can tell you that the building's reuse entails many complicated components and code issues that must be resolved during comprehensive design review. The last concern I have is the lack of training of commissioners. I noticed several times during your deliberation on design issues that commissioners defer to colleagues who have the expertise to make the judgment. The reason for this is inadequate training. One training per year is the minimum. You should attend preservation workshops on topics that relate to decision makings that you're facing. You should at the very least be familiar with the Secretary of Interior Standards of Rehabilitation. When I was on the Commission, I attended preservation workshops, seminars, or conferences at least once a year and sometimes more. I did not only gain background information on preservation, and I also learned about other practices of other jurisdictions. Educated and informed decisions are necessary in preserving the architectural heritage of our city. Please remember that Glendale relies on you to protect the community interest. As you recall, I attended the National Alliance Preservation Commission Forum in Michigan to accept the certificate of 2010 NAPC Commission Excellence on our award design guidelines. This award was due to community efforts and great city staff, including Mr. Jay Platt, who initiated that application. I speak today because I want the city's application of these guidelines and preservation standards to be worthy of an award as well. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, I have no further cards for oral communications. The next item is comments from commissioners. Anybody has anything they wish to share or comment on?
I had a comment. I wanted to request as staff that the property at 1333 East Mountain was one of the ones that had windows removed without permit placed. It seems like that's a topic that keeps coming back, and I think
staff is in ongoing discussions with the owner and the owner's representative on that property, so it wouldn't be appropriate to hear it at a commission hearing until we reach some kind of resolution where we could share with the commission. And the way things are going, this could be, we can't promise when that would happen as of now.
could it come back to us for input and approval, not just information?
If we deem it something that we can't approve at staff level, we could bring it back. And I could talk about that with the director and see what the best course would be. But while we're in discussions, I don't think it would be the right thing to do to kind of bring it back during that process. But at the next hearing, I'll come back to you with a read on what we can do in terms of having commission input on this type of situation in the future. Mm-hmm.
There was a second house mentioned during oral communications that has had illegal window replacements done, and I did not hear specifically what that house is. I didn't hear the address. I just heard stone, unfortunately. So do you know, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, so it's a stone house in North Glendale that was identified in the Stone House survey as National Register eligible, with the implication it would also be locally eligible. Neighborhood Services has issued a warning notice to the owner, which gives that owner 30 days to come to the city with a proposal to remedy the situation. And if we don't hear from the owner in 30 days, we continue the process and ultimately could go into the courts. I expect, because the house is on the market right now, that we'll hear back from them sooner than later and work on that process. The house is not individually designated on the register. It's been identified in a survey. Mm-hmm. So it's a historic resource under CEQA, but doesn't meet the provisions for purview under the commission at this point. But it could under the ordinance, but it doesn't necessarily. So we will also, in the discussion that we have on 1333 Mountain, see if the director wants this type of project to be coming to the commission. Mm-hmm. In general, we try to defer as much work to staff as possible. You've heard their concerns from the Historical Society about some of those decisions. We stand by them, but we want the process to work as smoothly as possible, but we also want to have as much oversight as possible to make sure we're always doing the right thing.
What's the address of the second property?
Oh, good question. It's on Angelus.
362 Angelus, was that it?
Maybe 3062, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And follow on to that,
Thank you.
which actually has some relationship to that. A couple months ago, I believe, I can't remember how long, I had asked if we could revisit the original Highway Highlands survey, because we have these surveys done, and then, typically I think there's a 5-year shelf life on them, so to speak. So when we don't resurvey, we really don't have a feel for what's going on and how much historic preservation erosion there is. So I was wondering if there'd been any follow-up on that.
The good news is we do have a resurvey of the Stonehouse survey, if that's what you mean, the Highway Highlands. Because it found there's a house in northwest Glendale on it, so it kind of went beyond that immediate neighborhood. That was resurveyed several years ago. At this point, that resurvey may be 5 years old.
Yes, that's what I was referring to. That was the resurvey, which was quite a long time ago. There was
no, compared to most of our surveys, it's brand new, spanking fresh. But
so it's the best of the worst. Huh?
This is an issue with all surveys, ultimately. Until we have, even if we had a citywide survey in Los Angeles, where they're doing the nation's biggest historic resource survey ever, they already know that parts of that survey, because it's taken so long, are past the 5-year threshold. What we do, once something is identified in a survey, surveys don't just die on the shelf. The identification in the survey lingers, and if someone comes to us and says, I want to tear down this stone house, we go to the survey and we say, oh, this was identified as locally eligible in whatever year, and we will tell the owner that they have to hire someone to resurvey the house to give us an update to see if there are any changes that are, germane to whether it's still eligible or not. And so we have protection, even if we can't update our surveys on a continual basis. And that would apply to the Stonehouse survey, and that's how this one was brought to us by the Historical Society, so it was caught by the community, but we knew it was in the survey. We identified it, and we'll go from there.
So just a quick follow-up on that. When a survey is done and a home is identified, are the homeowners notified of the potential?
Historically, they haven't been, and that's obviously an issue that we want to address. Historically, we haven't recorded every home in a historic district. That would be our more immediate goal, because those, obviously, we want to have everyone, as titles change, know that they're buying into a historic district, and that's on our list of things to do, hopefully, in the coming year. In terms...
Can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
You said you haven't identified all homes in historic...
No, we haven't recorded.
What do you mean by
with the county.
Oh, with the county.
The way we record Glendale Register properties and Mills Act contracts, we don't have recordation right now for all the properties in the districts. That would be a great step toward when someone comes to us and says, I didn't know I was in a district. If they're a recent buyer, for example, it would be very hard for us to accept that if we know that the paperwork would be pulled up in a title search.
So even though the zoning is identified in the, it's a zoning issue. So the type of zone you live in, isn't that like on all the disclosure papers that come through when a house changes hands?
It should. That's right. It's an HD overlay. Historic district overlay is applied to every property in a district. Again, the more times you can remind someone, so between if we can put it on title, if we have the zoning designation, if we have the signs up in the neighborhood, and sooner than any of the other things we're talking about, we'll have the brochure prepared that's going to go out to homeowners and property owners in districts that will go out on an annual basis. We're going to be reminding people as much as we can. Ultimately, some of the Historical Society's concerns about illegal work are completely beyond anything we have control over, and the best education in the world isn't going to stop someone from doing work without a permit if that's their desire.
If I may interject, I think we need to curb this conversation because we've gone quite far beyond just general comments. We're entering into a discussion about historic district policies that hasn't been noticed.
Okay.
Which is true.
Thank you. Thank you for reining us in. Okay, if there are no more comments, we'll go to number 6, old business, and having none, we'll go to number 7, new business. 232 to 234 South Brand Boulevard, Masonic Temple, Glendale Register number 15, Mills Act application.
All right. As the Commission is very aware, we've been through several rounds of hearings this year for the rehabilitation of the Masonic Temple on 232 South Brand Boulevard. The work is almost but not quite finished at this point, and we'll talk about that a little more later. But the owners are applying for the Mills Act contract at this point with the desire to move the process forward to obtain the contract, which would be written and recorded with the county in December and sent to the county in early 2016. And then the Mills Act tax reassessment would occur so that it would be reflected on the October tax bill. So there's a desire to move this forward for that reason. The staff is supportive of the Mills Act application in large part because the work that's being done was approved by the Commission, was found to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards, was reviewed by the applicant's historic preservation consultant, Page and Turnbull, who made the same determination as the Commission had and helped guide, I imagine, the Commission in their determination. One concern that staff has had is that the work isn't done and you're being asked to make a decision on a Mills Act contract without the opportunity to review to make sure the work was done to your satisfaction. As with all of our Mills Act applications, the Commission typically will visit the property, observe any deficiencies, any nonconforming issues, and by way of conditions, remedy those over the course of the next year or 2 years or whatever timeline the Commission establishes. Because this work isn't completed, you don't have the opportunity to do that. So this is an unusual application. We generally see the Mills Act running concurrently with the nomination process. In this case, of course, the Masonic Temple's been on the register since 1997. It was identified in the preservation element in 1977. So it's a property that's been on our radar and protected for a long time. This is exactly the type of project that benefits from an incentive program. And if you've read the Historical Society's opinion or letter to the Commission, you'll see that they're saying that they're concerned that this is different than the way we treat a house, and that some of the changes that were approved for the Masonic Temple are beyond anything that we would approve for a house. I think it's very important to remember the difference in the types of buildings that we're talking about and the difference in their histories. Pretty much every house we've ever brought onto the Glendale Register and given a Mills Act contract to was continuously occupied through its history with maybe a couple of gaps here and there. This is a building that was suffering for decades from underuse and lack of maintenance. And I think part of staff support for all of the work that went into it, as well as I think the Commission's support, was ultimately that this building is being brought back to life through this process. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the pictures of the current conditions that were included in the baseline documentation that you received from the applicant to refresh your memories of where we are. Everything, most notably, the building is bright white now, so it's got a clean finish. The stair tower is nearing completion, but obviously not there. We still have construction barricades up against the lower part of the front facade, so we don't see the storefront work. Is this visible enough?
Yeah, it's just not on the TV.
Yeah, they can't put it on the TV today. Yeah, we're having all sorts of problems. So, so we have the barricades up. The storefronts aren't in. I haven't been able to see, and I'm not sure if any of you took the opportunity to tour the building in the last few days. So you probably have more updated view than I do. But just running around the building here, you see the central bays of windows that were approved. You see the infilled windows, which I think are very effective for what we were hoping to gain. You also see the new louvers that were installed in numerous locations. Just so you know, there are two kind of funky-looking louvers up here that break the pattern, and these were original louvers. These were part of the mock-up process that Crusoe Affiliated did in their work, and these will be removed, and these original louvers will be replaced. There are a couple of other issues with louvers that we can talk about more ultimately. And then you see the new windows, which are simulated divided light windows, which is what was approved from the beginning. That was the intention, and it was known. Unfortunately, it wasn't as clear in the drawings that came to the Commission in May as it should have been. But on the consultant's part and staff's part, it was the expectation that these would be simulated divided windows. And the Historical Society has raised questions about that. And if you have any specific questions, the consultant, John Lisak from Page and Turnbull, could help you with those. Coming around the side of the building, we see the rear facade where this arched window was installed, which is similar to an arched window that was on the back of the building originally, but at a different location. And then these kind of nanowall. Actually, this is the only nanowall, I believe, now. These are fixed windows here. And there's a small glass, you can't really see it as well, a glass kind of railing here, since these windows would open wide in the opening. Here's the north facade in the context of Brand Boulevard. Looking directly at the north facade, you see the louver openings here, and again, the historic louvers were retained. Numerous historic windows at the sides were restored and retained. Of course, all of the windows at the front were part of the restoration work, so all of the bays of the windows there are the original steel windows. The back building with the context of the north facade, and a direct shot of the east facade. So we can use these for reference if you have any specific questions. In our recommendation, we included 3 conditions that I wanted to share with you. The first is kind of wordy. We were, as I mentioned, concerned that the work was incomplete, and we were uncomfortable approving a contract in that situation, but we recognized the applicant's desire to move forward with the application and respected that because we believe the building is eligible for a Mills Act contract as a Glendale Register property. The gist of this is that upon completion, staff is going to review the entire project. We're going to note any deficiencies from any of the work that was approved by the Commission on the construction drawings. We will work with the owner of the building to remedy the deficiencies, whatever they are, if there are any. There's only one that I know of right now. We'll work with the owner. If the owner disagrees with those deficiencies or otherwise doesn't plan to remedy them, we'll schedule a hearing with the Commission, and the Commission will be able to require that work be done if the Mills Act is to remain in place. If those conditions aren't met, the Mills Act can be canceled. Under state Mills Act policy, that means a 12.5% penalty of the full market value of the property would be assessed against the owner, with that money going to the state rather than the city. So we have no incentive to cancel it financially, but we would use that as our stick to make sure that the work gets done. The second condition is that the maintenance plan that was submitted as part of this Mills Act application, which staff believes is an excellent maintenance plan that looks at all aspects of the building, from the small scale cleaning up litter around the base of the building to looking at the roof on a at least 25-year basis to replace the roof, with many gradations in between of monthly, yearly, and other kind of rhythms of time to make sure things are done. We believe that maintenance contract should be appended to the Mills Act contract so that it's recorded with the county and becomes a binding document as part of any agreement if you approve or if you recommend to the council that this be approved. And then finally, we believe that the baseline documentation is a good start on this. What you have in your package indicates where work hasn't been completed. For example, at the storefront, there's a placeholder photograph. We would like to take it a step further and make sure that we get closer up photos of all parts of each facade, and then also photos of the roof areas, so that we just have the full envelope of the building documented as a baseline after the work is done. So your discussion tonight and your ultimate decision is advisory to City Council. So if you choose to approve, we would recommend that we'll relay that to Council. If you recommend to deny, we'll do the same thing. We support this because the work, we believe, has been performed in accordance with all aspects of what was approved, and then we have the provision for anything that might not have been that we can't see right now to be reviewed later. If you do ultimately decide to deny, we'll need some findings for that because we don't really have any precedent for this kind of situation, and we would need to be able to relay to City Council why the Commission felt it was important to recommend denial. And that ends my comments.
you. Okay, so I will open the public hearing. We have one speaker on this item, Vrej Mardian.
We have the applicants here.
Oh, I'm
we
so sorry.
They may not have filled out a...
Yeah, I want to go first.
Evan should go first, yeah. Bring those up.
Do I need to fill out more?
Ultimately,
please.
yeah.
Hi, I'm Evan Krenzine, Vice President of Development for Caruso Affiliated. Thank you for taking the time to review this project again. And I don't really have that much more to say. I think Jay covered it all, but just to give a status update of where we are with the building, I think some people, I toured with a couple of the commissioners and some questions that came up about status and opening. Just sort of general update. CBRE is going to be open for business on January 4th, the first Monday of 2016. So there is a major push to finish everything by the end of the year. They'll be occupying floors 5 through 8 of the building, and they are actually also going to be most likely taking floors 3 and 4 of the building too, so the full upper office levels, and we're still working on some deals for ground floor restaurant, food use tenants to take the ground floor, second floor mezzanine, and potentially the basement. So I think those of you that visited the site saw that it's quite a remarkable space for a potential restaurant and a unique use there. One other question that just came up in terms of the application, the DiPietros are still technically the owners of the property, but title is anticipated to transfer to Caruso Affiliated in the first week of December, due to how the deal was worked out with the DiPietro family. That's sort of the nature of that, and I know there were some questions about that, but everything is on track to close in the first week of December, and we've had a great experience working with the DiPietros and the city of Glendale on this project. So if there's any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, John Lisak can respond to anything in addition.
Yeah, John might want to respond to questions unless you have a presentation.
Yeah. We don't have any.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Hi.
Actually, it might be more appropriate to take the rest of the public comment and then during your discussion, if you want to open it for questions.
Okay, right, without a presentation. Okay, Vrej Mardian.
Good evening again, Chairwoman Vartanian, Commissioners. My name is Vrej Mardian. I'm here on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Commission. While we're very glad that the Masonic Temple will be occupied again, we do not believe that the renovation to it merits a Mills Act contract. According to the California Office of Historic Preservation website, the Mills Act is the most important economic incentive program in California for restoration and preservation of qualified historic buildings by property owners. The purpose of the Mills Act is to encourage property owners to restore and maintain the integrity of the historic resources. As you know, the TGHS strongly supports the Mills Act program. Currently, only properties in Glendale are eligible to the Mills Act contract. However, they are not entitled to one. Homeowners who seek Mills Act contract are routinely required to perform work to restore the integrity of their historic resource, and we congratulate the HPC for its rigor. Conditions imposed, including restoration and protection of the original wood beams, restoration of the original exterior finish, and replacement of newer windows without that being matching the original as closely as possible. The changes the HPC approved at the Masonic Temple were based on applicants' repeated claim that they were necessary to make the building valuable for the particular tenant. This dictated virtually the decision, including the originals that had to be filled to accommodate the very large new windows. And their stair tower is not a structural necessity or represent or restoration of the historic character of the building. We respectfully suggest that no ordinary homeowner in Glendale will receive Mills Act contract from HPC if he or she had performed such significant alteration to a Glendale registered property. The HPC would impose strict conditions to restore the building to a closer approximation of the original. The conditions listed by staff do not count. They are simply directives to the applicant to finish the project. We ask that you treat the applicant for the Masonic Temple exactly as you would treat any other ordinary Glendale citizen or homeowner. We also note all work undertaken, including the new windows, was approved by HPC. Page Trumbull's revised memorandum on March 20, 2015 was clear that the new windows will be contemporary with single central panel flanked by multi-pane divided lights, windows similar to the casement windows found in the original building. But the new windows are standard storefront extrusions with applied buttons. That is not contrast with the original divided lights, windows, contemporary multi-pane divided lights, windows promised by the applicant at the TGHS meeting, and also at the approved by the by the HPC. These are simply large sheets of glass with exterior bars glued or otherwise attached to them to simulate the divided lights. These are incompatible, inappropriate substitutes for windows requested and approved. They have no place in a historic building and do not meet the Secretary's of the Interior standards of rehabilitation. The Mills Act application should be denied on that ground alone. Occupancy of the Masonic Temple will help to prevent the deterioration, but renovation does not respect the building historic fabric. It's not a worthy example of historic preservation, and therefore it's not suitable candidate for Mills Act property tax credit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. John, did you want to speak, or Mr. Lisak?
Good evening. I wanted to take an opportunity to rebut some of the things in the letter provided by the Glendale Historic Society. I'm going to refer to the written letter. First of all, there was a belief that the building can no longer be considered eligible for the National Register. First of all, that's not really relevant to the Mills Act. As long as it's listed in the any state, city, county, or city and county official register, it would qualify. So as long as it's in the Glendale Register, we believe it would qualify. But we also believe that the building still retains sufficient historic integrity to meet the requirements of the National Register. Secondly, there was a comment that none of the alterations represent or were represented as historic restorations of the character of the building. Even the front facade was a missed opportunity to restore it closer to the original. We disagree with that. The project included repair and restoration of 50 steel window units on the building's main facade and a total of 72 window units, which was done at a substantial expense and effort and done very well, I must say. The project has repaired and rehabilitated a number of what they call spalled concrete or fractured concrete cracks, the board formed concrete on all elevations. The project is going to restore the wrought iron metal grill at the front arched entryway. The project is actually restoring the granite base at the bottom of the building, which was removed. And we're also, it turns out, going to restore the window storefront surrounds in cast iron. We had talked about that at a previous hearing where we were looking at alternate materials. So that we are going to restore those as well. The Mills Act contract can be used for restoration, but it can also be used for rehabilitation, and it can be used for preservation and maintenance. So there's more than just restoration involved in a Mills Act contract. And this is a rehabilitation project. I mean, that's what it is. There have been modifications made to the building in order to make it to bring it up and have it be used effectively as an office building. And we've taken the opportunity to review that and believe that those changes are consistent with the language of the Secretary of the Interior standards. As for the kind of new divided lights, I agree with Mr. Platt that our application could have been clearer, but the windows are always intended to be simulated divided lights. They have very, very thick insulated glass units, which in order to make them true divided lights would make them very fat in profile, just in order to make the engineering work. But there is guidance. I think that all historic preservation projects really need to be treated as their own individual projects, and I think this project is consistent with that, and the windows are consistent with the existing windows, yet differentiated. And we worked with the applicant. The application actually had kind of a different set of window profiles, and we worked with the applicant to make sure they looked more like putty windows, so we beveled the window frames. I have drawings that show how they match. We did a window survey and looked at all the existing windows and made sure those are going to be restored properly. So I think that it's our opinion, professional opinion, that the windows are indeed compatible, yet differentiated from the existing windows to the extent that would be consistent with the standards and is appropriate for this project and building. So I'll close there, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Are there any questions at this time? Can I just ask you one quick question? How is it that a mountain falls off?
Well, so one of the we've been talking about this. A small modification, I think, to the maintenance plan would be to make sure when the annual window washing is occurring that the mutton bars are well affixed, but they are effectively glued in place. They're glued in place with silicone. During construction, they get knocked and hit and can fall off. I've had replacement steel windows that I've put in place that instead of putty, use what they call an aluminum stop. And I've had more problems with my aluminum stops popping off of new steel windows than I have had with kind of these bars. But in the course of 20 years of working on historic buildings, I've kind of done every type of window thing you can imagine. And I'm more worried about other components of the windows, and I think it would be a good amendment to the work plan to put that in place. But they get knocked, they get hit, and they do fall off.
Hopefully that was a fluke.
I was, as Evan knows, I wasn't very happy about that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we'll close the public hearing and begin Commissioner deliberations. Like to start?
Well, I have a question. So the baseline for this is basically as it is today. It's not as it was in 1930. So we're just saying, in effect, that the stair tower was originally there and everything else as of today, rather than what it was in 1930.
Which is true of all of our Mills Act contracts. A lot of the houses that we've designated have additions made, pools installed, whatever else has happened. So for the purposes of the Mills Act, we use that as a baseline, which means that when we review the properties to make sure someone hasn't snuck in a vinyl window somewhere, we have the documentation that shows us what was there at the time of the contract, which is usually the time of designation, but in this case it's different.
Do you know why the timing was different and why the Mills Act was never applied for or granted?
By the previous owners?
Or at the time it was designated even?
I believe it may have been owned by the DiPietros, certainly in 1997, I believe they owned it. Yeah, so, and I have no idea why they never applied.
It's not like they applied and it was denied or something. It was never even applied.
Not that I've ever heard, yeah. Can't imagine.
But if this had been on the Mills Act, the things that have happened to the building today wouldn't have been able to happen.
They could have happened if the commission felt that they met the Secretary of the Interior standards and they were warranted by whatever conditions whatever condition the building was in at the time. But that would have been a public hearing and a decision that the commission would have made.
If I may add to that, had the previous ownership applied for a Mills Act, it's very likely the commission would have put on numerous conditions to that Mills Act to refurbish the building. As you recall, the building hasn't been in the greatest condition for many years. So it's unlikely you would have granted a Mills Act to the building in its previous state without numerous conditions to repair it and just do some basic maintenance on it. Maybe go beyond that.
If the upper stories had been vacant for as long as they were and the building wasn't able to make any money, enough money to continue maintenance on an ongoing basis, the Commission may have made a decision similar to the one you made here to find ways to allow it to be brought back to life in new uses. This is all speculative.
Well, I would feel much more comfortable if, when they first started this back, when the DiPietros did it, 2 years ago, that they had attempted for the Mills Act at that time.
Although nothing that the DiPietros did, except for the changes that the Commission approved to removing the interior lobby, none of that work was performed at the time. So all of the work that you're seeing now is approved by this Commission under the current. Well, I don't want to say ownership, but the current stewards.
I have a couple thoughts. First of all, I want to thank the Glendale Historic Society for your letter and your careful review and research. It's always helpful for us to make sure we're seeing the most stringent opinions and position on historic preservation, and so I really appreciate that. It helps, I think, each one of us come to our own decision. I did a little research because I too wanted to make sure we were treating this building equally to that we would any residence or property that we had granted Mills Act before. And so when I was reading about what is a Mills Act program on some of the official websites, it says economic incentives foster the preservation of residential neighborhoods and the revitalization of downtown commercial districts. And so then it talks about exactly that. You can have preservation, and Mills Act could be for that purpose, which is more what we see, I think, in some of the homes that we're talking about and in pure restoration. As it comes to the commercial downtown districts, it's less about pure preservation and potentially more revitalization, getting a new use out of an old building. In this case, that was really like a skeleton. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to research a little further, and even another site said the purpose of the Mills Act is to provide an incentive for restoration, rehabilitation, and preservation of historic buildings. And then I just looked up in the dictionary, what does revitalization mean? It says bringing again into activity and prominence, revival, impart new life or vigor, regeneration. So as I thought about this in light of residential properties that we have granted the Mills Act, it's very different. I did not approve these conditions to restore the building. Otherwise, we'd probably be going backwards more in time than allowing some of the changes we needed to make, whether codes had changed in the meantime, structural compliance was different, or whether in order to bring life, you've got to make it appealing to a new tenant, for a new use, for a new purpose. And obviously, they had been unsuccessful in years before, and I don't think it's because they weren't looking for a tenant. It's no one really wanted to take the space as it was. So I think that helps me kind of balance and come to my own opinion about, am I okay granting the Mills Act in this position or in this case? And quite honestly, the decisions I made to grant some of these changes were made probably under the impression that the Mills Act was already there. I never questioned either way. I was kind of surprised that they were now applying for it because I thought, oh, wow, why would they have had this building on the register and not had the benefit all these years? So I can't say that I would have made different decisions. I think we had to come to some very complex decisions in balancing restoration, revitalization, getting life put back into this building. And so with that said, although there are things that could have been slightly different, could have been clearer in drawings, I think at this point, because the changes were approved, and I think it's the best thing for the building. It might not be the right thing for preservation, but it's the best thing for revitalization, and because the Mills Act applies, I would support this application.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Shire, for your well thought out research and comments. I guess I don't see the relationship between the time of vacancy, like we're sort of assigning a relationship between the time this building has been languishing, which is unfortunate, and the allowances that we're granting. And to some extent, that seems okay, because we do want to see this building come to life, and we're greatly appreciative of the future new owners' willingness to revitalize the building. But about the Mills Act, I wasn't under the impression that, you have to be a charter city to have the Mills Act, yes? Or
You have to be a certified local government.
certified local government. So have we been a certified local? Because I don't think past a certain point in time, the Mills Act was even, when this building was granted, or maybe during the 1977 preservation element period, when a lot of things were listed, that you could get the Mills Act. Is that correct?
I've been corrected, and under the state law, the Mills Act, any jurisdiction can bring a Mills Act ordinance into place.
Mm-hmm.
Glendale.
When did we?
In 1997, and
okay.
And other cities have done it at different times.
Okay.
We are a certified local government, of course.
Right, and it wasn't until around 2000, 2001 that new listings were coming in earnest, when things kind of
when the
got
register
going.
was created in 97, 37 properties from the preservation element were automatically put on the register.
Right.
It took a few years for the program to pick up after that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first designations were either 2001, 2002, somewhere in there.
Yes, that's right. That was after the historic district guidelines regulations were brought in. So, although I, in principle, agree with what Commissioner Shire is saying, I kind of feel like, in a way, unfortunately, I missed that meeting where the changes were approved, and then I came to the next meeting, and there were still more things being discussed. And I was thinking, well, we did have an agreement, informal as it may have been, that the lobby would be brought back, that we felt initially that the skin of the building would be maintained as it is, except for some window changes, but, we didn't expect there to be a staircase put on the outside, and there were some things about that internal staircase idea that were so complicated and cost prohibitive that they couldn't be done. So the Commission, rightly, in the interest of moving the project forward on this very stringent timeline that we kept hearing about, like this all has to be done by X because we've got tenants coming in, and it was quite rushed, that we did approve it, and, I'll certainly stand by that. I think it was the right thing to do. But, I'm a little concerned about the stewardship here. I would want to apply, technically, and this would be ludicrous, but technically, I would say, well, if you want the Mills Act, take the staircase off. But you put the staircase on, so that's totally ridiculous. That's not going to happen. But I would say bring the lobby back. I would say put divided, authentic divided light windows on the building. I would apply those conditions because those, it is about revitalization, but it's also about preservation. And the fact that the building has been languishing for years, I don't think excuses the need to preserve a building that's been, basically neglected for a long time. There were some very impressive historic features on it that, could have been dealt with. And I'm wondering why, the Mills, here we are again at the last month of the year, and the Mills Act is being debated, and we don't even have a complete project, and we're going to approve it under duress. And I'm wondering why it always works out that way with this project, where we're working under duress. And I just don't feel comfortable with it. Maybe after I hear everybody speak, I will feel more comfortable with it. But at this point in time, I'm saying, no, maybe there will be a Mills Act in the future, but until things are resolved, the things that have not been completed yet, I'm having trouble getting to the Mills Act.
And if I could just throw something in specifically about the lobby, but it applies to the stair tower also, both of those features, the creation of one and the loss of the other, were approved by the Commission in their deliberations. So.
I know.
Okay.
Yes, I know.
Well, I find myself agreeing with both of you for reasons. I do think that what Mr. Platt has said is they're different. It's different than a house, and it requires different things. I do like the Page and Turnbull idea of what they're going to do if the Mills Act is agreed to, because I think it won't fall into disrepair like it was for so many years. But I am concerned that we're rushing into this thing without finishing. We're signing off on something that we haven't seen, and I don't quite understand why. I mean, even staff hasn't seen what is going to be finished to recommend it until it's finished. So why the rush?
The rush is because we have an application in place and we're obligated to move things forward through the public process, and you are ultimately recommending something to the City Council. So we're not rushing it because we want it to be rushed. We share some of your concern about not having seen everything that's going to be on the building when they're finished, and that's why we wrote a fairly detailed condition. We worked with the city attorney's office on that to make sure it's everything we need it to be. With that condition, as a staff member, I am satisfied that we will be able to make sure that the work conforms to everything that was approved. It's within, as I said, it's within the Commission's realm of or range of opinion to say that you're uncomfortable with the timeline and not recommend approval. That said, it still goes to the City Council. We have it scheduled for the first hearing in December, and the Council will hear the Commission's opinion on that and make their own decision. So.
In some cases, I think it's not any different than us approving a Mills Act with conditions, because then we still leave it up to them to do the work later, for Jay or staff to approve the work later. In this case, we have drawings or details or renderings or things we have approved that we know they are obligated to do to that level. And again, it's staff to review later. If there's anything concerning, you would always bring it back to us like you would on a residential property, or you would on this as well. I think what gives me a little more comfort that it would be done well is, one, the penalties are huge. I can imagine the value of this building. That's going to be a nice sum. Also, the maintenance plan is very, very extensive. And so from the life of it,
I like that part.
Yeah, we have approved, like it or not, or for those commissioners that were here or weren't here, we have approved the work to date. So it's really ensuring they implement it to those details. So I don't think it's that much different, because we often approve Mills Act contracts with work we haven't yet seen.
But are you concerned, though, with the letter that the Glendale Historical Society wrote about them putting in windows that weren't approved, that were not the windows that we approved, and staff okayed?
That's not exactly the case. The drawings were not as clear as they should have been, and we apologize for that. But on both my part and the consultant's part, we never expected these to be full, true divided light windows. If you look at the image, I hope you can see it.
But you didn't say that at the time, though.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yes, I'm apologizing. I'm saying staff did not. Part of this may be because everything's been so rushed. I can't make excuses, but we didn't focus on that issue in the way that we should have. But it was never expected that these would be, as Mr. Lisak said, if these were true divided light windows, the proportions would be very different than the drawings that you approved. And when we see this, we're not saying that there's one sheet of glass here. In some ways, we can say these are divided light windows because each of the sections within these rectangular divisions by the mullions are individual windows, and then we have the muntins applied to the face of those. So when I look at this from both on the street and in this photograph, this is the visual effect that I was expecting to see on the building. And in my professional experience, and to a much greater degree to Mr. Lisak's experience, simulated divided lights are often used in historic settings, and they've been approved by the National Park Service on federal rehabilitation tax credit projects, which has a much higher level of review than anything that we really ever deal with. And as we've noted, case by case, we thought that this was an appropriate solution, and it does look the way we expected it to come out. When you look at the drawings and the renderings, this looks different. It's unfortunate that muntin fell off, but simulated divided light windows are in our world. We approve them throughout Glendale, and on this property they seem to be an appropriate solution.
Where else are they approved?
Regular window replacements all around the city. We don't have a lot of commercial buildings with divided lights like this, so it's kind of unusual.
So did you say each pane of glass is a separate pane of glass that's somehow held together and then the muntins go on top of it?
No,
That's just a curious question.
Each of these the larger divided rectangles are two sheets of glass that are sandwiched together with an insulating barrier at their perimeter, so that they provide an air gap between the two sheet, the inner face and the outer face of the glass, and they provide a lot of thermal value that way. So within this rectangle, we have one sheet of glass on the outside, one sheet of glass on the inside, and then we have the applied muntin grid on the exterior face.
So
and I'm not sure if we have interior grids also. Mr. Lisek can submit a photograph to the Commission to review the details.
Yeah. I'd like to see that.
For the record, I'm going to pass around a photograph that shows one of the windows from the inside.
Thank you.
So this is one pane of glass. Lighter inside the glass. Here's a piece on the inside. Outside, so the appearance is.
If John, come back to the microphone, please.
So there's several different ways to do divided light windows. You can have I'll call them grills for lack of a better term. You can have a grill applied to the inside, because you have two pieces of glass. You can have a grill applied to the outside. You can have a grill applied to the inside and the outside. Or you can have what they call a divider inside the glass. These windows have all three. They have one on the inside, one on the outside, and then a piece that's inside the glass unit. And you can see from the inside that they give the appearance of a divided light window.
And under our guidelines in our historic districts, we are approving thermal glazed windows with double pane insulating glass units with simulated divided lights. And the number one reason people want to replace their windows is they perceive that there's an energy benefit and ultimately a cost benefit to doing so. There are arguments against that, but the city doesn't feel that we're in a position to tell someone who is trying to save energy, and this is just talking about our general policy here, that they can't do that because they're in a historic district. In a Glendale Register property, we would be able to do things differently, and we have certain benefits through Title 24 that we can apply, but in this case, we never expected these to be single glazed windows.
And just to further elaborate, the California Historic Building Code would apply to the existing windows or replacements to the existing windows, but for new windows inserted in a new historic building, you have to follow current code. So you do have to meet the performance requirements of a new window, because effectively it is a new window, which makes it more difficult to kind of have a single divided light. But in addition, creating all these windows with having true divided lights, you start to have many seals in place, and the opportunity for the insulated glass to fail rises just because of percent.
So the muntin configuration that one sees on the outside, which is, if you were to touch the window and you'd feel, the muntins are there, the thicker ones as well as the thinner ones, that is repeated on the inside, the same configuration.
Like the drawings,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, we're seeing only a portion, so I'm
it's
assuming
mirrored.
the entire window.
Well, the outside is a beveled piece to simulate a puttied window, and then the inside is a flat bar, which is the same as the steel windows in the building.
But then what he's saying is in between the two pieces of glass, you also have it, so
Right.
it's
So
giving
when
the
you-
effect of it going all the way
All
through
the way
glass.
There's a shadow line,
Right.
so you can't
So you-
see a gap when you look up
So when
from
you look
ground.
at the double pane, it
Right.
gives the impression of an actual
And that's
real
a good
mullion.
shot. They have a lot of dimension.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have
didn't
drawings too, if
understand
you
that.
want to see drawings. But
I thought we were
that would be
talking
easier.
about, clip-ons on one side or sandwich, which of course would,
Right.
is something that we all frown on. But
I agree with you.
if it's a simulation of an actual authentic divided light,
This is the same concept as any simulated divided light window that we approve.
Okay.
The scale's different, so it looks a little different.
Right. Okay, that clears up a lot for me and the
you.
windows.
No, and this picture is very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I agree with what Commissioner Shire said about the fact that we do approve Mills Act applications or recommend contracts where we haven't seen all of the work done yet. They're on a work plan.
It's true.
And I do feel this is a very detailed work plan. Jay, I have one question, and
Sure.
that would be, do you know how the city, on an ongoing basis, will ensure that the work is actually, that the work that's been laid out in the plan actually happens?
That's a great point, and we don't at this time. With Grand Central Terminal, under Disney's ownership through the development agreement and working with the redevelopment agency, Disney created a reporting schedule to report back on a laundry list of aspects and items around the building. I think if we did something like that and required that the owner, whether it's Crusoe affiliated or a future owner, would be obligated through a Mills Act condition to, I could recommend an annual basis or whatever the commission thinks is appropriate, report back. And it could be as simple as modifying the work plan so that there's a notes column or something so they can address each item and say not applicable, whatever was done during the course of that year. That will help because some of these things we're looking 15, 20, 25 years out when none of us will still be here. And it will be very clear to future staff members, what work needs to be done, what was done in the past. So that sounds like a really good idea to do that.
Can I ask a question of you, Jay?
Sure.
Well, it's actually two questions. Did we close the public hearing?
It can be reopened.
We can reopen it.
Yes.
Okay, you may know the answer. Do you feel that the changes that have been made thus far and what's planned, that the building is eligible for the National Register, and do the owners have an intention of nominating it to the National Register?
I can't speak for the owners. I think it is still eligible. It's a striking work of architecture, and I think that stands today in the same way it was in the past. It also has cultural associations which could lead to finding under Criterion 1. So it may meet one or two criteria for the National Register.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'd like to open up the public hearing or ask you to do
sure,
so I could
absolutely.
ask that question of the owners.
Open the public hearing and ask, who wants to come back up?
It's certainly a consideration and something we'll continue to explore. I don't have a definitive direction on that right now, but it's certainly there are certainly many benefits to doing so. We'll continue to consult with Page and Turnbull on kind of the options for the building going forward.
What do you think, Page and Turnbull?
As I mentioned before, I think the building's still eligible. I think whether they want to go through the process of nomination or not isn't really my determination.
No,
I think
and I'm not asking you.
Yeah,
So
I think there's
your
there's
opinion.
benefits to doing it as well. I do think it's still eligible, but the building still has those features which convey its significance. So,
Thank you.
And I also just want to quickly respond to the Glendale Historical Society and thank you as well for your comments. They are always appreciated, as Commissioner Shire already said. And I just wanted to point out, again, I'm kind of reiterating things that have already been said, but two statements in your letter that stuck out for me were that none of these alterations represent or were represented as restorations of the historic character of the building, and that no ordinary homeowner in Glendale would receive a Mills Act contract from the HPC if he or she had performed such significant alterations to a Glendale Register property. And I also just want to say from my perspective, that, a house is a house, and it's not necessarily going to require changes to the extent that this type of a building. In other words, you don't change the use of a house, but what we're looking at here, clearly a structure of this size, Masonic temples just, people aren't using them anymore. And so, unfortunately, and again, it is a rehabilitation. And I think, as the consultant mentioned, that, I think the building embodies preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation. We see a lot of preservation at the front facade. The windows were preserved, as Mr. Lisak mentioned. Restoration of the granite base at the facade. The storefront surrounds are being restored. The wrought iron grill at the facade is being restored. The doors are being restored, and the storefronts are being rehabilitated for a contemporary use. So I think we have to sort of look at the fine differences in those definitions, and also appreciate that we have a little bit of everything going on in this building. And I would also agree. I think the building still retains its stature, and despite the size of those openings, I don't think they detract from this great, historic resource that we're looking at. So, does anybody want to discuss any further questions, or does anybody?
I'll make a motion if discussion's over.
If we want to review or some additions to the motion, do we do that now, I think, maybe?
Yeah, what I generally do is read back what I've heard from you,
Okay.
and then you can amend or revise or add anything to that. I believe the commission was supportive of all three of the staff conditions that were recommended.
Yes.
And there was an idea that brought up by Mr. Lisak, but it seems like a good idea to modify the maintenance plan to include making sure that the mutton grills are adequately adhered to the glass on the outside. So we can add that. And then we can also add a condition, and I didn't hear that there was any about the ongoing annual. We can add a condition to create an annual report submitted by the building owner to the city, detailing whatever work was done during the course of that year, so that we can keep an ongoing record of the maintenance plan and make sure things are being met as agreed to.
Can I make one more? Quick on to number 3 on the conditions. We say the baseline documentation submitted as part of the Mills Act application will be augmented upon completion of all work to depict all segments of each building facade and all roof areas. Can we add the words in close-up sections?
Yeah, that was the implication, so I'll make that more clear.
Oh, is that what you mean by all segments?
Yeah, what I picture is we'll have an overview shot of each facade taken as closely as detailed as possible. Then we'd break each facade up into not quadrants but segments that we would then have closer up images.
Let's use the word close-up.
We'd also ask that the areas of the north facade, where there are the adjoining low-rise buildings, that those be documented from the roof of those adjoining buildings, so we really see down to the bottom. And then we also get someone up on the roof to document all of the roof conditions. So I'll make that a little more clear.
Thank you. Everyone else is.
And that is everything that I heard, unless there's anything else.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, thank you.
I move to recommend to City Council the approval of the Mills Act contract for 232 and 234 South Brand Boulevard, which is the Masonic Temple, Glendale Register number 15, with I think there are now 4 official conditions, 2 modified slightly.
Yeah.
Is it 4 or 5? Is adding the work plan a condition? adding
There
the,
already was a work plan, so we're amending
sorry,
that one.
amending the work plan? Is
No,
it
I'll just add that to condition 2, which is about the work plan.
Oh, okay,
I'll
great.
add a secondary section to amend for the mountains.
Perfect. We have a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
No.
Commissioner Shire,
Yes.
and Chair Vartanian.
Yes,
A motion with approval with conditions, 3-0 approval.
thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Let me find my agenda. And we will move on to 7B, new business, which is 804 West Kenneth Road, request to reconsider/revise Mills Act condition.
Okay, let me get my notes for this one. So this is a longstanding issue. Thank you. Longstanding issue with the commission regarding the property at 804 West Kenneth Road, which you see here. The commission voted to recommend designation of this property in May of 2011. It was heard by council, which put it on the Glendale Register in June of 2011, and then the Mills Act contract was signed with the owner in December of 2011. In that contract, there was a condition that the owner has previously come to the commission to ask if it could be revisited, revised in any way, and that occurred in April of this year. And the applicant is back with further information about the subject fountain. So I want to just kind of run you through the photographs that have been supplied to us by the applicant. This is the designation photo that shows the fountain area. The commission, at the time as a condition of the Mills Act, asked that the fountain be restored to a functional state. At the April 16th hearing, that was continued with the concept of making the basin stucco, which is not the most finished-looking stucco that we've seen, better condition. But the real condition was to bring this fountain back to a functional fountain state. When the commission saw this, there was obviously some work going on in the house that doesn't appear to be related to the fountain in any way. The basin was dry. There was some sort of terracotta urn in the center of the fountain, and you can see some tile work at the base of the stairs that didn't continue down into the fountain, the brick coping around the edges. The applicant and the applicant's representative have made a very compelling argument that this fountain isn't original to the house. And based on that, if the commission agrees with that, they're asking that the commission rescind the condition to restore the fountain. Staff is recommending that if the commission does believe that the fountain isn't original and is inclined to see some change in that area, that something be brought in its place rather than leaving this basin that obviously caught the commission's attention as kind of a incomplete feature of the house. There are a number of alternatives that I believe the applicants will present to you as ideas for what could be done there. But the base request, which you'll hear from the applicant, is that the condition be removed from the contract. So here are the photos that we've received. You can see there'll be close-up photos, but in this area where the stucco abuts the stairway, you'll see that there's kind of a thickness of stucco that suggests that this was applied after the fact, that wasn't part of the construction of the stairway. You can see the detailing of the brick copings and the low brick wall abutting the stair isn't at the quality level that we see at the rest of the house. The way the tile work is at this corner, you have a very awkward kind of connection at the tile. The connection at both sides between the brick and the tile suggests that this isn't something that would have been built in 1928, if I remember, whenever the house was built. Again, we see some more awkward tile work here. We see this very strange-looking electrical connection with the surface-mounted junction box with the conduit running down against the face of the stair and then being surrounded by the stucco, which seems to clearly have been applied after the fact. And then we see the tile work around the wrought iron handrail. There's no reason to believe that these stairs aren't original. There's a raised doorway at that location that we presume to be part of the original house. The gauge and the quality of the ironwork suggests that it's old. So again, we're only kind of speculating on things, but clearly the tile was installed in a strange way around the existing ironwork on the stairs. There's also the strange feature of the sprinkler pipes rising up into the basin, and then the basin cement work or stucco work being built around some of the risers for the sprinklers. So those are the pictures that were submitted. We don't really have a staff recommendation because this is a very unusual case, and we want the applicant to have their ability to make their case for you. The one thing that I can say is that it does appear that this fountain is kind of an added feature rather than an original feature. The fact that it's not original doesn't mean that it's not historic. If the commission felt that this was something that was added later that has historic meaning in its own right, under the Secretary of the Interior standards, we make sure that we don't lose or demolish things that have acquired significance after the completion of the building. In my opinion, this wouldn't be one of those features. And the solution, I think, is up to the applicants to see where they can take this for you.
Okay. Thank you. I don't. Oh, do you have a card?
Should have a
That's
speaker
okay.
card.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry. This is Chris Crignotti.
Good evening, Commission and staff.
Thank you for having your name. I know your name, but
thank you for having us. My name is Chris Crignotti. I'm with GNC Properties here in Glendale, and we are under contract representing the sale of the property at 804 West Kenneth Road. And as part of that, we decided to take it upon ourselves to help finish out the obligation of the Mills Act contract, mainly because it's probably not fair to put that on the buyer. So one of the conditions, as he mentioned, was this fountain situation. So. Our recommendation to the seller was to come and speak with you guys about, the property owner rather, to speak with you about having this provision removed from the contract because it really doesn't seem to be an historic feature of the house. Trying to get it to be a functional fountain would be rather dramatic. It just does not. It's been under such disrepair for so long. With the sprinkler valves in the tank, in the basin, the water level would submerge them, essentially. I don't even know how this was ever really a functioning fountain, looking at it, to be honest with you. And those are still functional sprinkler valves. 2 of them are. 3 of them are not. 2 of them are. So to move them would be rather destructive as well. So, the initial position, the property owner's initial position is just to have it completely removed. At this point, let whomever comes in and does a restoration of this property after the sale, let them sort of figure out what they want to do with this thing. They may want to bring it back to life. They may not. Having it a functional fountain at a time when we're in such a serious drought seems kind of a bit gratuitous as well. I was told at one point that it just needs to work. It doesn't need to be operating. So in a sense, we could get it working and it could still sit just as empty as it is today. So one idea that we had, and I brought some photographs for you, would be just to turn the fountain into a planter, maybe, to put some drought-tolerant plants in there. There's sprinkler valves, so it could certainly be irrigated. I searched online for samples of things, and I really had a hard time looking for fountains that have been turned into gardens. Mm-hmm. And then I was reminded by another client of mine that we actually have one in the city of Glendale, right in front of the Brand Library. There's a big fountain that's been turned into a planter. And so I brought pictures of that. Is it all right if I bring these up?
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. My guess is we have a lot more than one fountain turned into a planter in the city.
We might. I probably should have driven the whole city. But when this was pointed out to me, I drove up to it today and took these photographs and realized this is actually, a nice little bird bath maybe in the middle that is certainly more friendly to the environment at this point, the way things stand. Again, Preferably, the property owners would be relieved of the obligation of this fountain restoration of any kind. Someone who buys this home will be doing other modifications to the property and might want to restore it as a fountain and could certainly meet that obligation as well. But I think for the sake of this circumstance, that it just be, because it's not really a historic feature of the house, at least we don't think it is, and that's up to you to decide, I guess, that perhaps it shouldn't necessarily fall under the purview of the contract altogether.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Yes, sure.
A couple questions.
Yes.
Is there a buyer for the home?
Not yet. That's it. Would you like to buy it? Okay.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions or thoughts?
Well, I have a question on the timeline. I have the original Mills Act contract that the owner signed back in 2011, 12/2011. And they were supposed to have it finished by December 31st, 2013. Then they came to us, I think, in April of 2015. And when the notes I wrote at the time was, well, we asked why they hadn't done anything from 2013 to 2015. He goes, well, time flew by. And he needed to know what to do with this thing. And we said, well, you know, he was going to research it in 3 months, which I guess in April would make it June, July, and now we're coming in November. This seems to me that this whole time they've just been kind of kicking the can down the road as far as whether it is or is not. I can't tell you on this. I don't know enough about it, but I mean, they've had plenty of time to come back and indicate that this isn't or never was, but now the only reason that they're kind of doing it is because they want to sell the house. So
I completely agree with you. And it came to us in April, and again, when you're not meeting your deadlines on a Mills Act with serious penalties, whether the city chooses to impose them or not, to me that's serious. So your staff had already granted, I think, extensions prior to several prior to coming here. When they came in April, they indicated that they would have this working by June.
right.
Out of the goodness of my heart, knowing from April till June you couldn't hire someone, find tiles, do all the work, we granted to December. So it does bother me tremendously that literally we're not taken seriously. The Mills Act isn't taken seriously, deadlines aren't taken seriously, and now at the 9th hour, the realtor has to come to the rescue to try to resolve this. I mean, I appreciate, Mr. Craignati, you helping the situation, but I find this unreasonable.
Exactly.
So my position would be no, we don't remove the condition. Let it continue and pass to the new owner, and the new owner can come before us and present whatever they might want to. And if there's penalties assessed, then let's be serious about the tax benefits that owners are getting, and their obligation to adhere to conditions. That's my position.
Good points. I'm kind of mixed on the fountain being, I'd like to hear a little more about the fountain and revisit the rationale for why the fountain was included. I'm not necessarily saying that there couldn't be a revision in the way we approach this, and meaning doing something else with the fountain or doing something else with that space. It's just that in order to make it presentable and to, fix the tile where there are obviously all of these sockets and outlets, I think there would be some need to do some removal of piping and various other things that to sort of decommission the fountain would also take some additional work that would have to be done so that making the fountain functional wouldn't necessarily be the end of any costs associated with the Mills Act contract. It would just turn into something different. So that's a possibility, but I don't see where if you're trying to save money by coming with this now, that I'm not seeing how this would necessarily save money. It would just be a different solution to that space. would still be costly.
Well,
Or-
yeah, let's keep in mind that preservation and being granted Glendale registered properties of the ultimate standard with Mills Act, that cost is involved. The owner has also been benefiting from incredible tax benefits over the past few years.
Maybe if I can jump in there, for whatever reason, this house in particular has not received the level of tax benefit that most of our other properties have. I encourage the owner to contact the county to see if an error had been made. It could have something to do with the length of ownership. The longer a house is owned, the benefit may not be as great. But there definitely was a reduction in taxes. So,
Percentage may be similar. Ultimate amount might be different.
no, the percentages, we keep track of the percentages. The percentage savings on this property was considerably lower than comparable houses in kind of the northwest Glendale area.
And what was the reason that the Mills Act conditions weren't implemented? Just simply
I
not
can't
getting
speak,
around
I
to
can't
it?
speak
His
for the
quote
owner on
was,
that.
"Time flew by."
Time flew by.
If you want
And
to,
we have it right here. Number 1, perform all work necessary to make fountain at east facade functional. I mean, that was a Mills Act condition.
now, one thing based on the evidence, and at the time, at the time of designation in the condition, I hadn't personally focused much on the fountain. Given the new evidence and the fact that there is this surface-mounted junction box with an outlet in it, it makes me wonder if there was a basin created but didn't have any plumbing for its kind of an internal fountain. It was perhaps a recirculating pump concept with whether it was that terracotta urn or some other feature in the center that may have had a pump in it that would have shot up water. But it doesn't look like the basin itself was necessarily designed to be a fountain, a plumbed fountain, which for me leaves the opening for alterations in that area. I certainly, as staff, wouldn't recommend just saying let this condition go away, but I would personally see other possible options rather than turning it back into a fountain, since we can't say for sure. And I could investigate that more also. I haven't lifted up the fountain that's always been in the center to see what's going on underneath it.
It
Well,
does. Oh, go ahead.
Oftentimes we request photographs. I mean, this homeowner has owned the property for quite some time. What did it look like then? Did they get any photographs from previous? Are there any photographs on record? If we're trying to do a restoration, right, then let's do a little bit of research, investigation. What if you carefully remove off some of that to see, does the tile go all the way down? Like, what was it? You know, this is, if we're serious about restoration, then we may need to do some careful investigation. Well, then, if they don't think it was this, then what might it have been? And let's bring that back.
Right, which is definitely an option. None of these photos really prove one way or the other whether these tiles were there or not. They do look like older tiles, and there's the possibility that this was just a tiled stoop with the garden or with the terrace running up to the base of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be one option for
Lily Pond, right?
for a solution that isn't a fountain.
It would still
I wanted to entertain that.
That's true. So we can, as Commissioner Shire requested, we can either ask for more information be provided or researched, or try to get an understanding of what this may have been at some point in time, or get some earlier photographs. I'm hesitant, and I think we'd have to just let that probably, looking at the timeline, the way the timeline has been going thus far, I'm going to guess that that's probably just going to end up passing as the home is for sale. Like
It's around the corner.
it might just end up passing to the new owner. On the other hand,
What's the deadline? Excuse me.
It's December 31st of this year.
Okay.
On the other hand, I mean, it is, as we've already said, it's highly unusual for us to let a condition drag for so long and then to change the condition. But maybe that's just an indication to us that going forward, maybe we need to be more stringent on holding our homeowners to their deadlines and not being very, compassionate or
There
lenient.
is a lesson in here. There were extenuating circumstances that we heard from the applicant that we accepted, and then we had a lot of trouble staying in touch. There were messages unreturned, and so I can't speak to all of the issues there, but the lesson has already been learned. So
we could consider it a unique situation that hopefully will not be setting precedent.
It won't.
But take it as a lesson, as Jay said. And honestly, in my personal opinion, I can't with the drainage, with this electrical outlet and with the sprinkler valves inside this basin. I would be happy to just see it go away and be maybe paved over and have the staircase retiled nicely and just make it part of the patio.
Commenting on that, I definitely see the points of my colleagues here, and I also see the practicalities. And I don't know if the owner is the person sitting here is the owner. Well,
yes,
certainly getting your money's worth out of your realtor, But I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about your delays. But since we haven't heard that, and I take that point really seriously, that that one of the things that everybody agrees on is that we've implemented a very robust Mills Act program, and where the idea of compromising it is not acceptable. But when you consider this particular thing, it's really a mess the way it is. And if we disallow the fountain, or we excuse the fountain, there has to be something adequate and robust and aesthetically sound that replaces the fixing of the fountain, and it has to be done by the date. And that means that if your house isn't sold by then, or the owner's house isn't sold by then, it better be done. No more delays. So we need to come up with, if we're going to agree that the fountain doesn't have to be activated, then we need an acceptable solution for this space, and there are no more delays that will be allowed. Otherwise, there should be penalties incurred. I don't know if, do we have that in the Mills Act? That
we have what we talked about before. We could cancel the contract with the penalty of 12.5% of the market value. The city can also not renew the Mills Act contract, but the contract nonetheless stays in effect for 10 years with the amount of savings dwindling during that period.
I see.
The incentive of maintaining the Mills Act is, since we're expecting a transaction, it should be an enticement to a new buyer to come in and maintain the Mills Act and keep the house up to the standards that we expect.
Does it make sense why any homeowner would risk losing that on the edge of selling their property and not meeting their criteria?
I agree.
Unfathomable.
So do we have thoughts for do we want to agree that, sure, we'll reopen the public hearing. Come on up. Mm-hmm.
Hi again. Thank you for allowing me to speak again. There are a couple of points that I'd like to address in the conversation that's going on. Number one, why the time delay? Without getting into long detail or much detail about their personal situation, I will say that this is the dissolution of a marriage. And it's been going on for quite some time. We had the house listed a couple of years ago. And I don't know if any of you have been through a situation like that, but sometimes they are a little bit more challenging than others. And this type of a situation does require both parties to be on board with everything. I'm not saying either party was obstructive of anything, but hopefully you can understand that under the circumstances, things can be delayed. Secondly, I understand that there were a lot of delays, and the homeowner is very appreciative that you granted an extension. But it doesn't seem fair that whether or not this fountain is considered historic or not has anything to do with that. It feels like one of the comments made it almost feel like, just because of the fact, it felt very punitive that perhaps we won't allow the consideration of this fountain being non-historic simply because everything has dragged on so long. Respectfully, you granted extensions. The deadline is December 31st. We are here with more than a month time to get this rectified. Separately, we would like for you to consider that the fountain is not a historic feature of the property, that we have presented a lovely alternative, one that the city of Glendale finds appropriate for one of its major historic landmarks, to turn this into a lovely flower bed with a nice, perhaps little bird bath or something in the middle. And, you know, I wasn't going to bring up the tax benefit conversation, but it was brought up, so I'll address it. And respectfully to Mr. Platt, there really was not any property tax savings in this case. In 2010, their property taxes were $10,215. In 2011, their property taxes were $10,394. In 2012, their taxes were $10,596. In 2013, their property taxes were $10,596. In 2008, they were $9,913. They have not seen any property tax reduction or any incentive monetarily. She requested to put the house on the market because she loves this house. They've owned this house since the 90s. This was a labor of love for them. It was not about getting a significant tax reduction. Their taxes were $10,000. They were going to save a few $1,000s a year. It wasn't about that. It will be for the next owner. And I understand this commission and a lot of people who support the Mills Act, and I always thought that that is a boon for any buyer. Why wouldn't any buyer love it? I happen to have 2 Mills Act property houses on the market right now, this being one of them, and then another one on Pacific Avenue. I had buyers come in and buyers go because, for whatever reason, except one reason was most people don't understand the Mills Act, and a lot of people are scared to get in bed with the city on a contract like that, that is in perpetuity. And so I'm spending most of my open houses and my interaction with buyers trying to get them to understand that it really is a great thing. You really do save a lot of money. Most houses qualify pretty easily. I shouldn't say easily. The ones that do qualify, if they have conditions, it's all fairly reasonable. Nothing is really crazy. Some houses get it without any conditions, and once you have it, it's a huge thing. A lot of people are very leery of this program. And a situation like this, despite the fact that the homeowner has let it drag on so long, is one of those reasons, unfortunately. Now, yes, could they have done some better diligence in the beginning when they first signed the contract? Perhaps. But we're dealing with regular, average homeowners. They're not people that sit on a commission every day, that understand how these things go, that can look at something and maybe instantly make a judgment. So I just hope that can sort of weigh into your discussion. The last thing is just about, I want to point out, and if I put it in the packet I originally sent, I believe, the architectural description as found by the city staff. When you Google 804 Kenneth Road staff report for the historic designation, that report comes up online. You do a Google search, a find of the word fountain, it appears nowhere in the entire description of the property. There's no mention of the fountain. It's not even brought up. All sorts of cute little things are. The roof line, the eaves, and all of these wonderful things, the balconies, all sorts of things are. But the fountain is completely overlooked. The only time you ever see it is in the photograph that he showed at the beginning. So I appreciate that it's taken a very long time. Our goal is to get it handled now at this point. And I hope that you can understand that while it may have taken a while, that shouldn't really have any bearing on whether or not this particular question about the fountain is addressed and responded to. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll close the public hearing. Okay. Do we have any new thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that, my thoughts. Anyway, I think that I personally would be willing to entertain not having the fountain be activated and functioning as a fountain, but I would like to understand and make sure that if we amend this section of the Mills Act conditions, that we understand exactly what is going to be done and we work through that. So that's the way I'm thinking about this right now.
And if I can just speak to the time element, if the commission does expect this to be done by the end of this year, there's a very good chance that the December hearing will be canceled. And if it's possible to make a determination tonight of what direction you would accept and vote on, that would help staff move this forward, definitely.
Could I ask you a question about the fountain at Brand Library?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a historic fountain?
It dates to the period of the addition to the Brown Library for the Art Center, which we include as part of the designated portion of the building. We've never extended that. We've never thought that designation extended to the fountains, and
it's just interesting, though, if this is at least historic enough, and along with an addition that was historic at some point, that the solution there was to retain it and put a planter, probably for water reasons. But if, in this case, the applicant is saying that the fountain is not historic, but we're just going to still leave it and we're just going to fill it with a planter, it's not like per like. It's a quick, cheap solution to meeting the Mills Act condition.
That's true. We have lots of non-historic features at properties, and it's completely within the Commission's purview to expect them to be aesthetically pleasing, functional, or whatever. The Mills Act applies to the entire property. My thoughts about the fountain specifically are that there's a good chance this was never a fountain in the way that I think of a large fountain like this, which leaves me open, if we're saying it's a non-historic area feature of the house, I think other aesthetically pleasing solutions that match the character of the house would be appropriate in this situation.
Would you like to suggest a few?
Two that obviously come to mind have already been mentioned. One is a planter. There's already irrigation in there. That's one of the biggest issues when people say, oh, I'll put a planter, and we're reviewing something for DRB or for an exemption. We always make sure there's irrigation, and sometimes that's, it's an expense that someone doesn't want to make. Here we have it. To my mind, the brick copings around the patio are sympathetic to the design of the house. They don't jump out at me as being horrible. The issue of drainage would come up if this were a fountain. I believe that the concrete bottom would have to be removed so that there was appropriate drainage.
Well, if it was a planter, it would also have to be draining. If you're talking about making the entire thing
you have to hold on. So if it were a planter, we have irrigation. We would have to remove the bottom or large parts of the bottom so that it could drain naturally. And then we would have that. There would also be the issue about the coping around the inner face of the planter. Obviously, the earth wouldn't rise up to the top, so the Commission could recommend a decorative treatment for that area. The other obvious option that I see was also mentioned previously, which would be to remove this, infill it, and create an additional paved area similar to the paving around it to have a larger patio at the base of the stairs. That would lead to the question of what happens with the stucco area that appears to be on the face of the stair that could hide historic tile or not. In terms of a timed solution, that solution opens up more issues in terms of getting it done by the current deadline. If the Commission wants to extend, if that's the preferred option, I would probably recommend extending the deadline. So those are the two things that most obviously come to mind.
Well, if we're looking at alternatives, I don't think keeping a non-historic fountain, which they've proven to us by these photos, according to them and all that's known today, why we would keep it.
Right.
So if it's not historic and they don't want it as a fountain, then I say it would need to be removed. Pavers to, best match the existing, I guess, and new tile on the exterior edge of the stairs would be then a reasonable solution. And as far as the time frame, when there's a will, there's a way, and December 31st could be met.
Okay.
Thoughts, agreement?
I think filling in, creating continuous pavement like the rest of the patio, and then finishing off the face of the staircase, including, of course, filling in the open socket, but finishing it off would be a viable solution. I think the drought-tolerant garden idea is also a solution and would take maybe more complicated work to knock out the bottom, create a soil bed, finish off the top of the rectangular pool area that's going to now become a garden. So, whichever one is your choice, I think is acceptable. I think it's cleaner to do the patio, but I think either one of those, of course, having to be done appropriately, and they can't just be kind of, fudged in. They would have to be done well and of good quality, that either solution would work.
Okay.
I'd go with that, too. Either one.
So we're saying that we'll give the owner the option to do either, but they will have a deadline of December 31st.
I don't agree with if it's non-historic and it shouldn't be there and quality levels are out, then I say it should. From a preservation, restoration standpoint, then I don't agree with leaving it there, turning it into a fountain.
No, I wasn't thinking about turning the fountain into a planter. The planter would be removed. Excuse me, the fountain would be removed. It's not historic, and all of the connections and piping and wiring that relate to that fountain would be taken away, and this basin would be turned into...
Right. By fountain, we're not talking about this thing.
Yeah,
No.
We're talking about basically the basin.
The basin.
Yeah, the thing that would hold the water.
sort of using.
So the planter concept would infill this entire rectangle.
Okay, so you're talking about the whole thing,
Right.
whole thing being not historic and not relevant, including the thing in the middle that looks like a standalone fountain.
Right, that
And
just
the
goes
pool.
away.
Given.
Okay.
And so with both of these options, we have the issue of the tile. We don't know that the tile is historic or not. It looks like older tile, but then there's the strange tiling in front of the ironwork. So if, in either case, if this were a patio, obviously the deck would come down to about this level here, and we would remove this stucco. We would discover if there was any tile behind that. Chances are its condition would not be good. If that tile needed to be replaced, we'd probably need to replace all of the tile on the face of the stairway, historic or not. Mm-hmm. If the planter option is chosen, we still have the issue of the parging across the edges of the brick here and the base, and then wherever the earth level would come up to. One recommendation would be to allow the removal of this brick and the replacement with another coping, whether it's brick or terracotta. That would create a clean edge here where we wouldn't have this two materials on one object. The earth would come up to that level, more or less, or the plants would grow in front of it. And then there would be irrigation, and then we'd find drainage method to make sure that this drains.
So you're saying solution number 2 that I suggested would be an option?
I'm saying that, yes, I think both of those are options. If I'm hearing you correctly, the planter is an option. Filling this entire rectangular basin with earth and plants that meet drought-tolerant requirements and have adequate irrigation, plus some decorative work to make sure that we don't have this stucco parging kind of visible and creating some of the problems we have. If this became a paved surface, we would lose all of this. We'd have to infill part of the depth of this. We would find new saltillo or terracotta tiles to hopefully match this. Probably hard to do, so possibly these tiles would have to be removed on the adjoining surface if the goal was to have an aesthetically harmonious appearance. And then the same issue with the tile. The parging would be taken off. We'd see what the condition of the tile was, and then we'd make a judgment whether it could be salvaged or replaced.
I think I am leaning towards, just because it is not a historic feature.
We're talking about the pool and the thing in the middle?
No, the thing in the middle is gone. Let's
The thing in the middle is gone. That's gone. Now we're just talking about...
not there.
We're just talking about the...
Yeah, we're either going to
Basin.
fill it in so the edges of the pool would remain and there would be dirt and plants in it,
Right.
or the edges go away and there's a solid, just a plane of pavers running
Right.
across there.
Good, okay.
So, again, I can't speak, we can't speak, just as the owner may not be able to speak to why the Mills Act tax relief hasn't fallen into place as maybe it's supposed to. The point of a Mills Act tax relief is for us to maintain our properties or to bring them back to original as close as possible. And so if we're saying this is not an original feature, then it seems to me that even, and I think Commissioner Shire, this might be where you were going, that even turning it into a planter doesn't make it closer to what
No.
probably was originally there.
Right.
But at the rear and side facades of properties, we have all sorts of non-historic features on most of our Glendale Register Mills Act properties. We have planters, foundation planters that aren't original. We have backyard barbecues, decks, jacuzzis, pools, everything. So the fact that this isn't original doesn't mean we can't just make it look better. I think one of the things that caught the Commission's eye and led to this condition was that we have something that looks like it's supposed to be a fountain but looks like hell. And if they had come and this was a planter at the time of designation, I don't think anyone would have thought twice about it. It would have just been another feature of the property. That's why, I think either of the two options is fine, and we don't have to think about whether this is historic or not. At this point, it's a matter of just making this area not be the eyesore that it has been since the time of designation.
So do we at this point outline exactly what we would expect for either choice, and then do we ask the owner to make the choice? Is that our next
Well,
step?
you can ask the owner to make the choice. The owner will have an opportunity to speak if the chair opens the hearing again. What we recommend doing in situations like this is after you deliberate and come up with a set of conditions for any, I guess, conditions to the condition, you can reopen the hearing, ask the property owner or the owner's representative if they understand the conditions and if they can do it. But if they say, no, I don't want to do this, the Commission will then say, then we're going to invoke the cancellation policy of the Mills Act, if that's your wish. So I could read back the concepts for both of these as I'm seeing it now.
I'm just going to...
May I just please comment about some of the ideas that were thrown out there so I can explain?
Why don't we, I think what we're going to do is Jay is going to read back all of the ideas for both. So please pay close attention, and then we're going to allow you the opportunity to come up and, question or discuss some of those. So
which is option one for the Commission? I don't want to play favorites.
The pavers.
Pavers.
Okay. If the Commission votes for the pavers, or if actually you can also give the option to the applicant if you're comfortable with both options. So that's another thing to think about. If the new patio option is used, every part of the basin will be removed above deck level and somewhat below deck level. The area will be infilled appropriately, whether that's with concrete, with a mixture of earth, sand, and concrete, or whatever the contractor would recommend. We'll create a level surface in this area. New pavers will be placed over this to match the dimensions and overall appearance of the existing pavers. The parging against the sidewall of the stairs will be removed. The condition of any tile behind that would be assessed, so it would be very carefully removed. If tile's present, we'll see if it's salvageable. If tile isn't present, I'm assuming that we wouldn't be able to match this tile in any meaningful way, so that would lead to the retiling of the planter-facing portion of the stair. If we go with the option for the planter...
Wait 1 second, and the filling in of the open socket area.
Yeah, that would just be removed. That looks like it's surface mounted to the tile.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let me go back to that photo. It appears to be surface mounted. Maybe the tile was removed. It's hard to tell. But the conduit feeding it is definitely not in the wall. It's in the stucco part of the basin. You can see this green tube going down. So that would just go away. The sprinklers would also have to be relocated. I'm sorry, I forgot that. The sprinklers would be relocated in the patio option. In the planter option, the existing basin wall would be retained. All or most of the concrete or whatever the base is made out of would be jackhammered up or taken out so that it could drain to the earth. Soil would be placed in the basin at a level that's appropriate. Irrigation would be run through the basin and probably tie into the existing irrigation that's already there. And the copings would have to be dealt with in some way. I would probably recommend that the top course be knocked off, a new coping be put in. Alternatively, tile could be placed across the top of the coping to harmonize with the existing tile. So in this scenario, most of this tile at the top would be retained. There might be an issue where the junction box is.
And what about, I don't remember what it looks like, but there are a number of areas where the fountain, and I mean the thing in the middle that is going to come.
Todd's a great guy. I mean, look at him. What a sweetheart. Attaboy. Wait, Todd, what are you doing? How totally selfish and un-Todd-like of you. Come on, Todd. Come on, man.
Being recorded, and hopefully
Yes.
for posterity, since I'll have to look back at this to re-listen to those conditions. We'll make sure.
It's back.
So those are the two, unless you have any additional thoughts for those.
That was
Okay,
a
so
description
we'll-
of both.
Yeah, and then I think this is something we're trying to do as a rule with DRB and also with the commission, is to reopen hearings after conditions are read to make sure that there aren't any issues that we haven't considered and that they're also understood by the applicant. So.
Does the owner come up?
Sure, you can have whoever.
The owner or the owner's representative, so we'll reopen the hearing.
Hi again. So one thing I wanted to point out with regard to the drainage and possibly this becoming a planter bed is that I did not include a photograph of, but in the corner that's cut off in the photograph on the left, at the very bottom is a pipe that leads out of the fountain. So there is some drainage already established there. Whether or not it needs to be dug out in the middle, I guess we would find out for sure if we need to have the earth, the concrete removed so that there is earth contact, because there is a drainage hole there. But also, with regard to the possibility of just eliminating it altogether, Jay, if you don't mind scrolling through a couple of photographs, I want to try to give a little bit more context of the space. The one where I show the sprinkler valves would be one that I think might help. Okay, so if you look to the left of the fountain, you'll see that there's a step up there. So I just want you guys to understand that it won't be completely level all the way across from the step at that point. You'll step off the stairs, you'll step down across, and then you'll step up again to the motor court. So it won't ever be completely flush all the way across. And then if you go back, I think, to the main... Oh, actually go to the right one. If you see there's... I really wasn't expecting this as a possibility, so I didn't include more appropriate photographs. But the left photograph shows the south edge of the fountain, and there are steps down there as well. So I think before the homeowner can commit to anything, we really need to explore exactly how it all ties in on the other side of that wall.
Yeah, I'm trying to see.
And I unfortunately don't have a photograph of that.
If we look at this side of the wall here, this is brick paving along here?
Yes, it's brick on the other side of it.
And then we step up on this face of the fountain to the terracotta tile.
Yes.
And then we step down again over here.
Yes.
So we have
there's a whole bunch of level changes
two
there.
levels and two materials at least.
Which would just sort of make it not real pretty necessarily. It would be kind of a lot of up and down. So the other question I have, I guess, is more procedural and general in nature. If a homeowner wanted to install a planter on the side of their home, is that something that they would have to come before the commission to get approved?
Yes.
They would.
On a Mills Act property, we expect the owner to contact us for any changes that they're proposing, except for the most routine repair and maintenance.
Okay, so landscape issues, things like that. If they wanted to
Hardscape.
hardscape,
Yeah.
not
changing a plant, we don't need to talk about
right.
that.
So, but the installation of a fountain would. Okay. The only other response I have to kind of what's happening here is that the Mills Act was granted for this property with the only condition that the fountain be made operational.
Not true. There was also the removal of some awnings.
And the awnings, right. With regard to the fountain, the only stipulation was that it be made operational. While the commission hasn't voted on whether or not we think this fountain is historic or not, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's not. Somehow, in the process of approving this property for the Mills Act, this was never addressed. whether or not the fountain is historic or not. These details that I've pointed out seemed a surprise to everybody. So while this property was being evaluated, this sort of slipped through, and it was just simply asked to be made functional. At the risk of potentially putting the homeowner out even more, these Sotillo tiles are not the original tiles. The staircase
Mr.
may have
Cardinal,
been there.
we understand that not everything here is original.
Yeah.
The Mills Act conditions apply to this property. They're part of the designation in the Mills Act contract. Had Ms. Guerin come to us within months or a year after the conditions were in place and said, hey, I've discovered something. I don't think this was really here before. What do you guys think? You know, we would have done the same thing we're doing here, but nothing you can argue right now is going to suggest that the Commission doesn't have the right to find a solution to this
I understand.
part of the house.
No, I understand. But when a homeowner signs on the dotted line for the contract, they're agreeing to these conditions sort of under the presumption that the Commission has thoroughly investigated the condition that's being asked of them. If this is clearly not a historic feature of the property, it seems
even if it weren't, it was within the Commission's purview to ask that it be returned to functionality.
Right. And well, the point I'm making is that the homeowner at that time would have had the opportunity to just not sign on to the contract at that point. If it was deemed that, again, all that was stated is that the fountain be made functional, not that it be restored to some historical significance.
Which is still an option for you tonight.
Okay, so it seems to me that's the problem, is that there's some gray area as to what a functioning fountain is. We can certainly really try very hard to get this outlet to have electricity to it, and we can stick this fountain in there, and we can plug it in, and water will spew, and that is a functioning fountain.
Correct.
Right. So if that's
but it is not the functioning fountain that was envisioned by the Commission. Mills Act conditions may not contain all multitudes of options that could happen there, but it was very clear to us, and I assume it was clear to Ms. Guerin, that we were expecting this basin to be a functioning fountain in some way. It's an option you have tonight. If you would like to return it as a fountain, I'm sure the Commission would be very happy to hear that. Because you have come to us and said we cannot and do not want to return it as a fountain, it's a moot point, but the Commission is well within its purview to ask to approve that it turn into something else, even if it's a non-historic portion of the house.
I understand that. Okay. And the only issue, for lack of a better word, that I have with that is the second condition on there about the awnings was very specific. Remove them or change them to match the other awnings. The only part of this thing that was the only thing related to the fountain was that it be made functional. There was no direction as to where tiling needs to be placed, and I understand that some of that was.
Can I help you out?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, a condition is made in generality, and then the homeowner works with staff to determine exactly how and what. It would be our understanding that any homeowner coming before us with a beautiful historic property, for the love of preservation, as the homeowner stated at the time, would know what a Spanish-style fountain should be and would want it to revitalize that and bring that back. Original, years later, whatever, we need it to be at the same level of the home, especially for the Mills Act. And so I don't think you need to debate the vagueness of what it was. They didn't have drawings, renderings, all that, but staff works with the homeowner at that level to determine what's appropriate. And then the homeowner does it by the deadline.
And this is consistent with all city design review policy. Conditions put on to requests for the design review board are often written broadly, and staff works with the applicant to find a solution that meets the intent of the Commission's guidance.
So what is the intent of that condition then is what?
This is really a difficult point to argue any further if you want the
I'm asking what the intent was, actually, to be honest, so that I know, so that I can help.
I can tell you the intent.
Or just explain the intent.
If you look at historic Spanish colonial revival style books, which I know you're very familiar with, especially in Glendale, you've sold many of those types of homes, it would typically be a working pool fountain, not have a plug-in thing in the middle. That we had talked about at the time, even saying that's got to go. That's not original. That's just sitting there, and the homeowner agreed. It would be either tiled on the wall and floor basin of it. It could be at a cheaper level, potentially colored plaster or something nicer looking. Finish off maybe with a tile around the edge, maybe a bubble, just a simpler bubbler in the middle. I think any of those might be appropriate. Again, that's the staff level to approve and to best direct the homeowner. But that would have been the intent at the time, and I think discussion, whether it was written in there word for word, I think, again, it leaves a little bit of room for the homeowner to work with the staff to determine what they want to do, what they can afford, what's appropriate. You know, staff's been very lenient, very understanding. I mean, the time frame extensions are definitely
beyond what
evidence.
The commission is happy about.
Evidence
clearly.
of that.
Just to respond quickly to the Mills Act, the contract question, a homeowner does not have to sign the contract. They come here, you know, we give our recommendations and place our conditions, and if the homeowner is not happy with those conditions, they don't have to sign the contract.
Of course. Totally understood. So I guess the question that remains is just, I guess, maybe a third option, and maybe it was already dictated in a previous discussion, but I'm specifically, if we decided to make the fountain functional, most interested in how it's expected to physically function from an electrical standpoint and all of that.
We can give you a recommendation of a contractor who can help you figure that out.
Okay, but then would it then have to,
perhaps a commissioner personally could do that. The city wouldn't be able to do that.
True.
It is built into the Mills Act contract that any work done as part of any future work, which includes fulfillment of conditions, receive a permit from the Building and Safety Department. I see two serious issues here with the placement of the electricity as well as the potentially submerged sprinkler valves, and I don't know that you would be able to maintain those in place. The Commission is entertaining several options which may be easier and more affordable to pursue, but if you are saying, which it sounds like you are, that you'd rather see this returned as a fountain, I'm sure the Commission would be happy to give you some conditions for that.
well, I mean, I think since that is the original condition, maybe a third option, if we could have three, perhaps, so that we can really determine, not just from a financial standpoint, but from an aesthetic standpoint. It may seem appropriate, since it's not a historic fountain, to just remove the whole thing, but it may not be real pretty what's left behind, despite the fact that we can put tile
The Commission
there.
understands what
Right?
you've said, and I believe that will factor into their discussion when we finalize the conditions.
Right.
I think option one was what you just described.
Just elimination of it.
Elimination.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But you couldn't just leave a hole, obviously.
Right.
Fill in with pavers and finish it out.
Can I clarify?
We might want to close the public hearing at some
I thought
point.
we invited the homeowner
Thank you for your
back
comment.
Yes,
to
we
advise
did.
whether they would or wouldn't agree to these.
Yeah, he kind of took it somewhere else.
But I don't know if we got that answer.
We didn't. Maybe we have to reopen. Well, we didn't really close it officially. I just said it. Cher has to say it.
So, right, so the point of, I think the point of us going through the conditions was to ask the homeowner or the homeowner's representative to let us know if these conditions, or if there was a preferred set of conditions that you would like to select from.
Yeah.
So,
ultimately, I think it's best for the Commission to come up with its set of conditions, and if you see that there are two options that you're equally content with, then staff will work with the applicant on whichever one they choose. But we don't want applicants, and not just in this case, in any case, to be driving the discussion about what's an appropriate condition or
I
not.
misunderstood what we were doing here because we haven't done it before. So did I get the sense that my colleagues would like to see a new patio installed and have this removed? Or do we have consensus on that?
I do
We want to
think
do sort of a...
I'm sorry to interrupt. The applicant did make some good points that weren't clear about the change in levels and the change in paving materials. It wouldn't, at this point, just be a flat patio surface in front of this. It doesn't mean it's not possible to do, but it's not as clean as I was picturing it originally.
So,
Well,
go ahead.
if that's the case and they're presenting there's going to be elevation changes and difficulty, then I lean towards keeping the condition as is, having it a working fountain, having them do it decently like we originally talked about. It seems like the homeowner is willing to now do that. They're bringing that discussion back. Whether it was exactly original or not, yeah, like you said, Jay, changes happen over time, and it could be very easily made to a beautiful fountain for what it is, for what we'd asked for back in 2011.
Thoughts?
Yeah.
I think that's an acceptable alternative, as well as if done appropriately, the one that the homeowner's representative suggested,
which is
to create a planting base.
Okay. So we have a
Properly
fountain.
drained planting base.
We have a fountain or a planter.
Yeah, and the conditions that you outlined there with the stairway face having to be finished off as a result of modifying that basin into a planter or a garden would have to be part of that. But
Okay.
that's also an acceptable alternative if
Right.
the fountain isn't an alternative.
I would go with that also. If we're going to do it, then going back to Commissioner Shire, making it a working fountain again, or if that's can't be happen, then doing the planter itself
Okay.
with all the conditions that you have already stated about the concrete.
The tile and the edges.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, I'm confused too, because we're not, who's driving this now? Are we giving, I mean, we're saying either or, we're not picking one or the other. I mean, I would agree that planter or fountain, so I think we can all agree that we're
Not all.
So
I don't agree to the planter.
Okay.
Yeah, but the issue here is the commission will be voting to modify the condition that was approved in 2011, and I will read back both of those conditions, and then that will be transferred. And I have to check with the city attorney, because once the work is done, it doesn't really matter if it's in the contract or not. But I'll find out if it's better for us to amend the contract and have that re-recorded with the county. At this time of year, it's all going to be. We're going to the recorder not too far from now, so we might be able to do that if it's necessary. So we have three commissioners agreeing on a dual option, fountain or planter with conditions, fountain also with conditions, and then Commissioner Shire voting or inclined to vote for just the fountain.
Yeah, I would say the fountain or complete removal. But
Okay.
with option one being the alternative to the fountain.
Let's just say that option one is the fountain because it's what's already in the.
Okay.
Option two would be the alternate to convert the fountain basin into a planter.
A planter, okay.
So, there's anyone? Motion?
Do we need to, have we defined what we want in the fountain? Find that?
There is a caveat there that the condition as written in the Mills Act contract was so vague that I don't know that we could expect that the entire basin would be retiled.
Right.
It could be something where there's a tile coping down to the water line or something, just to kind of bring it back to some aesthetic character and maybe be refinished or painted so it looks a little better.
And we talked about that in April, too.
Right, yeah, there was talk about, in
I had
April, we talked
pictures.
about ameliorating the plaster, so.
Well, I'll make a motion that the original condition is upheld and this is turned into a working fountain by the deadline of December 31st.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Hearing none, do we have an alternate motion?
I would make a motion that we retain the existing Mills Act condition as it is with the returning of the fountain to a working state, including the entire configuration there, the basin as it is built now, with the alternative to create an appropriately drained and aesthetically appropriate finished garden in that space, including the refacing or the appropriate facing of the stairway
Very good.
tile face.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call. Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
No.
Chair Vartanian?
Yes.
Okay, we have a approval with condition to amend the Mills Act contract to either maintain the existing condition or, at the owner's discretion, go forward with the alternate condition to convert it to a planter.
Is it understood that this is the date?
By December 31st, 2015.
Okay, thank you. And item number 8 on the agenda is Planning Division updates and informational briefings. And having none, we are now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.